Mason woke up on the same stretch of sidewalk outside Alden Court. The sky above him a flat, colorless gray that could have been dawn or could have been the middle of the afternoon. He genuinely couldn't tell, and for a long moment he didn't move, half convinced that sitting up would prove none of it had actually stopped. His phone was dead. His hands were scraped from the fall. Nobody had called the police. Nobody had stopped to help. And when he finally staggered back up to his floor, apartment 108 was nowhere to be found. Just a clean, unbroken stretch of wallpaper between 107 and 109, as if it were waiting patiently for the next time it decided to exist again. He didn't sleep that day. He spent it instead doing the only thing that felt like it might keep him sane, piecing together everything he'd seen, everything the journal and the tape had told him, and everything the thing wearing his face had let slip in the nights leading up to that night, almost proudly, the way something ancient might boast to something new. Here is the truth Mason eventually pieced together. Alden Court was never haunted by a ghost. Ghosts are echoes of people who were gone. What lived behind the white door was not an echo, it was a mimic. Something old. Something that had survived the fire in 1962 in whatever twisted way survival meant for a thing like it. Buried under the new foundation. Feeding in the only way it knew how. By finding someone lonely enough, desperate enough, or curious enough to come looking for a door that shouldn't exist and then wearing them one layer at a time until there was nothing left of the original tenant to tell anyone what had happened. Every previous resident who'd vanished from Alden Court, and there had been more of them than the landlord would ever admit, had followed the same path Mason had. The knocking, the hallway, the white door. And in every case, the building had simply produced a copy convincing enough to sign a new lease, pay the next month's rent, and vanish quietly a few years later, leaving no one to ask uncomfortable questions. Running wasn't going to save him. That much became clear over the following 2 days, when Mason tried packing a bag and leaving the city outright, only to catch that same wrong smile waiting for him in a gas station window 3 hours from Alden Court. Patient and unhurried, like it already knew exactly how this ended. Whatever had learned his voice, his walk, his private habits, wasn't confined to that one white door anymore. It had gotten out through him, riding along in every reflective surface he passed, and it would keep wearing his face in public, in front of people who knew him, until there was nothing left of the real Mason for anyone to tell apart from the copy. Leaving didn't end it. It just meant losing the fight from somewhere he couldn't see it coming. So Mason went back, not because he wanted answers anymore, but because apartment 108 was the only place he'd ever actually seen the thing without its mask fully on, and the only place he stood any chance of finding a way to end this on his own terms. Mason wasn't the first person to fight back. He found the proof of that on his 7th and final visit to apartment 108, when the copy of himself was elsewhere in the apartment and Mason, moving fast and quiet, ducked into a closet to hide, one eye pressed to the gap where the door didn't quite meet the frame, watching for any sign of movement. It was in that closet, crouched low with his back against the wall, that he noticed the carpet in the corner had been peeled back and never properly relaid, curling up just enough to expose a stretch of bare floorboard underneath. Scratched into the wood was a message, the letters gouged deep and rough, edged with a dark, rust-colored stain that had long since dried into the grain. Old blood, Mason realized, worked into the same grooves as the writing itself, like whoever carved it had been paying for every letter. The handwriting was different from the journal. Rougher. Desperate. A previous tenant, the man on the cassette tape, most likely, or someone before him, had used what looked like a broken key to carve 4 lines into the wood, fast and jagged. Everything about the cuts suggesting a man working against a clock, rather than someone with the luxury of time. Likely all done in the space of a single visit, hidden in this same closet, before whatever had hurt him caught up with the rest of him, in case anyone after him ever found their way this far. Given how much blood had gone into the carving, Mason doubted the man had been in any state to make a clean run for the door by 2:08. Whether the wound itself had finished him, or the wall had simply closed before he could drag himself through it, there was no way to know. Either way, nobody had ever seen him again. And the carving was the only proof he'd existed at all. It copies everything. It cannot copy what it cannot see. It has no reflection of its own. Show it the glass. Mason understood, in the way you understand a thing right before it saves your life. The creature had spent uncounted years learning to become other people. Faces, voices, habits, the small unconscious things that make someone who they are. But it had done all of that without ever once needing to look at itself, whatever it actually was underneath the borrowed face it was currently wearing. It had likely never seen its own true reflection in its entire existence. And something that copies without understanding what it's copying does not know how to survive being copied back. He checked his phone. 2:01 a.m. 7 minutes. Whatever he was going to do it fast, or he was going to spend the rest of whatever he had left of a life on the wrong side of a wall that sealed itself shut at 2:08 sharp. There was a shard of mirror in the ruined bedroom, part of an old vanity that had cracked sometime in the apartment's long decay. Mason pocketed it with hands that wouldn't stop shaking and went looking for his double. He found it in the front room, standing exactly where he'd left it, still wearing his face, still smiling his smile. "Where do you think you're going?" it asked in his own voice, taking a slow step toward the only door out. Mason didn't answer it. The journal had been right about that much. Answering only fed it, gave it more of him to wear. Instead, he pulled the shard of mirror from his pocket and turned it outward, angling the broken glass until it caught the thing, wearing his face dead center. What happened next didn't sound human, and it didn't look like Mason anymore either. The moment the reflection touched it, the borrowed face split down the middle like wet paper, peeling away from something underneath that had no interest in staying hidden any longer. The scream that came out of it filled the apartment, filled the hallway, filled Mason's skull until he could feel it in his teeth. And underneath the sound, the thing was already changing. Features sliding and collapsing as whatever true shape it had been avoiding for decades forced its way back to the surface. Mason didn't wait to see the rest. He ran quaterte, out of the front room, through the doorway, back into the narrow seam in the wallpaper. Phone screen flashing 2:07 a.m. in the corner of his eye, like a countdown he had no way of stopping. Somewhere behind him, the screaming hadn't stopped. If anything, it was getting worse, curdling into something that sounded less like pain and more like rage. and underneath it, faint but unmistakable, Mason could already hear the low groan of the wall beginning to close. At the very end of the seam, one stride from his own doorway, with maybe 2 seconds left on the clock before 1:08 sealed itself for another night, Mason made a mistake he would never be able to fully explain to himself afterward. He turned around one last time to look. What he saw was not his own face anymore, and it was not any face at all. In the half-second before the hallway closed, Mason saw the true shape of the thing that had spent 6 decades wearing other people. Tall, wrong, its features stripped down past skin, past half its muscle, to something bone-white and blood-red and grinning, that didn't need a borrowed smile because it had never stopped smiling in the first place. A skull not decayed, not old but finished, like it had been carved that way on purpose. It looked, more than anything else, like every drawing of death Mason had ever seen as a child. The kind of face you're taught to fear before you're old enough to understand why. Then the wall closed. Not a second early, not a second late, exactly on schedule at 2:08, and the wallpaper sealed itself seamless, as if apartment 108 had never existed at all. Mason left Alden Court that same night. He didn't pack. He didn't call the landlord. He simply took the cassette tape, the shard of mirror and whatever was left of his nerves, and he never went back. He told himself it was over. Weeks later, a new tenant moved into apartment 110 at Alden Court. A young woman new to the city, thrilled to find a decent apartment for half the going rate. On her first night, she found an envelope slid under her door. No return address, no explanation. Inside was a single handwritten note. Apartment 108 is waiting for you. She frowned at it, set it on the counter, and told herself it was probably some strange building tradition, a welcome prank, nothing worth losing sleep over. Down the hall, in a stretch of wallpaper that had never had a door in it before, a small seam had already begun to open. And at the end of it, slowly, a white door was starting to appear, with black numbers already fixed at eye level, waiting for someone new to read it.